then there's also the spiritual purging of unwanted energy. So I think that's the basic thing about purging, is that it's the release of unwanted energies.
So I'll cut my dose in half. But then they say that the medicine gives you what you need, not necessarily what you want. So let's say I'll take half my regular dose. I'll still purge all throughout that ceremony. And it just blows my mind. And sometimes I'll take a bigger dose and my night will be okay. And the medicine, I think there's an intelligence behind it. You know, Mother Aya knows exactly what you need during that time in ceremony. Welcome to the Shamanic Tonic podcast, where we explore various shamanic concepts and other energy healing modalities, with the intention of being able to practically apply these concepts in everyday life to feel more empowered, heart-opened, and centered. Hi everybody, I'm Rai and I'm here with Lisa. Welcome to this episode of Rise and Shine Shamanic Tonic. In this podcast, we explore shamanic concepts and other energy healing modalities, and how one might practically use them in everyday life to feel more empowered, heart opened, and centered. And in this episode, we are planning to talk about purging, or the purging process during ceremony. But first, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our podcast. With that, let's jump right in. So, Lisa, what type of shamanic tonic are you drinking today?
Well, I just went with a real simple one today, which is basically a blend of orange juice with camu camu and a few drops of Star of Bethlehem. So, are you familiar with camu camu?
No, I'm not. What is it?
It's a plant, like a bush that grows along the rivers of Peru and Brazil, and it produces little berries, kind of like cherries, that are red and purplish, and they're loaded with vitamin C. Like I think it's the highest vitamin C food on the planet. It's a superfood, you know.
Interesting.
And yeah,
Is it
and
just
it's
vitamin C or is it other antioxidants in there?
oh, I would imagine there's others, but it's mostly well known for its vitamin C content, like probably I think like 60 times the amount of vitamin C. And it's interesting because what I've learned in nutrition is that the body can only absorb so much vitamin C at once. So when people take those, like 300 milligram vitamin C caplets, it's almost like water. I mean, money literally down the drain, because your body's going to excrete more than what it can handle. So time release capsules can be helpful, but I trust that because it's a plant that has that much vitamin C, that there's some benefit in having that for the body,
Yeah,
the wisdom of
that sounds
nature.
good.
So yeah, it's camu camu. You can buy it online. It's a powder that you can get in powder form. So that's what I'm drinking today.
It sounds great. Does it taste good? What
It
does
does
it taste like?
well. Mostly it tastes like orange juice.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I've added the extra camu camu in there. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Sounds good.
Mhm.
Today I'm drinking fennel today.
Nice.
For my understanding, fennel is supposed to be good for the stomach. I had a little bit of an upset stomach yesterday. And in this mixture though, in this tonic, I added a little bit of Mother Aya drops,
Mhm.
some Noyorao, and some rose. Those are sort of my go-to daily plant medicines that I like to connect with.
Nice. Yeah.
So Lisa, do you want to kick off this topic for us?
Sure.
Your thoughts on purging?
Yeah. What a fun topic, huh? So, yeah, I find it fascinating. Well, purging is both the purging of physical matter, right? Like I think we most commonly think of it as throwing up. Um, Without doing plant medicine work, it would be like if you ate too much or if you had the flu. or most commonly somebody who drinks too much alcohol, and the body naturally knows that that's too much toxicity, and so will vomit and purge. Um, and so that's a really good thing to do, especially through the gut biome, which is really like our first brain, because what happens inside the intestinal system actually dictates a lot of what happens in our minds. But
Yeah, I
then
had
there's
a lot of those nights in my 20s.
yeah, did you? Is
Yeah,
that
with
familiar?
alcohol. Yeah. So,
You remember that?
yeah.
Yeah, except for the times you didn't remember.
Right.
Uh, uh, but then there's also the spiritual purging of unwanted energy. So I think that's the basic thing about purging, is that it's the release of unwanted energies, or even if you don't know whether or not you want to release certain energies, the spirit does, the body does, and so we'll release things that aren't good for us, that are holding us back. And I think that's the bottom line with purging, is that it's the releasing of unwanted, unhelpful energies.
Yeah, and I think when people think ayahuasca ceremonies, I mean, at least for me personally, I think about vomiting.
Mm-hmm.
That's what immediately comes to mind. And during my first ayahuasca experience so many years ago, I just could not stop vomiting the entire ceremony. And during those episodes, I was thinking of so many things, different traumas that happened to me from my father. You know, he used to beat me all the time, and I was just releasing all of that. And as I was releasing that into the bucket, I could see all these parasites coming out
Mm-hmm.
spiritually from my body. You know, worms, bugs, centipedes, and they were all falling into the bucket. And it actually blew my mind.
Yeah.
I was like, what is happening here? And then afterwards, I just felt so much better. You know, I actually ended up forgiving my father, and I released all that darkness that I was holding inside, all that anger that I was holding inside, and now we have a better relationship. So I
Right.
think purging is amazing.
I do too. And it's an interesting thing because, like you said, I mean, people tend to vomit with ayahuasca. Most people will at least once. And part of that, I think too, is so that the medicine, if you can clean out the system, and of course it's best, we usually fast before ceremony so that there's not a lot of food in the system to begin with.
Right.
But um it's almost like initially it's a cleansing of the physical system so that the medicine can get in and work better and more fully. So there's that aspect too. And then so I mean, for most people it's not an enjoyable experience. I mean, I'll say, yeah, it's not like I'm going, oh hey, this is fun when it's happening. But for me, it's the small price you pay for the benefit. It's like sometimes we just do certain things that we don't love because there's a benefit to it, and we want the benefit more than we want to avoid going through that kind of experience.
Yeah, it's almost like no pain, no gain.
Yeah.
You
I'll
know,
never
you
forget my first ceremony. It was like I didn't really, I had some idea of what to expect, but of course when it's your first time you just really don't also know what to expect. And so it takes a little while for the medicine to kick in, right? Usually maybe about half an hour or so. And I remember I was just like sitting there, kind of waiting for something to happen, curious when something was going to happen. And then I started getting kind of tired and yawning, but then I remembered I heard somebody vomit. And I was like, oh, good. It's happening. We're starting. Let the games begin. And yeah, and interesting, like you too, with your experience, that for me, that first time when I did vomit, I remember cradling my bucket, and I just like I had my arms around it and I just kind of laid my head on top of it because I knew that it was a part of me. Like it was a part of me that needed to be released, but I was honoring it because, yeah, it was a part of me. And thank you for whatever you did for me, but it's time to go. And I just remember laying there, and then one of the spirit helpers came in and took it away and replaced it with the clean one. But yeah, it's very intimate.
It is. It's very vulnerable.
Hmm.
And to be able to do that in a room full of strangers, people that you've never met before, it's intense, you
But
know.
it's also, again, where we would be sitting at breakfast the next morning and like, oh, did you vomit? And oh, I heard you purging all night long. And as we mentioned before, like you get to recognize the sound of different people purging. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, so
Yeah.
and so is having a hard night, or and because you recognize the purge, and it's kind of like this human equalizing factor. Like it just sort of opens the door to people being vulnerable with their lives, like really sharing everything. Because when you can purge together, it just breaks down barriers.
I agree. So, first ceremony with folks, you're strangers, right? You don't really know each other, but after you've spent the night with them, purging, it sort of forms a bond
Yeah.
with them because you were through something together, something really hard. And like you said, the next day at the breakfast table, you're a little bit closer for it.
Mhm. I find, for me, I tend to purge somewhat early, it seems like, sometimes maybe before others. But I really haven't had the experience like some people I know who may purge throughout the night.
Yeah, yeah.
But I've also noticed, like, when I have purged more than once, um, it's interesting how sometimes if I'm sitting there in ceremony and then I have thoughts about a particular issue, that brings up the need to purge and to purge it out. And then there's also kind of the experience of like just starting to purge and then sensing what the issue is. I'm curious about your experience around that.
I have experienced that. Let's say I start thinking of an issue that I felt a lot of discomfort over. Let's say if the good example is trauma with my dad, right? If that starts to come up, it starts to create this pressure in my stomach, this
Mhm.
really deep sense of nausea. And it's not until I purge it out that I feel better. And that's why I do like purging because it releases that tension in my body.
Mhm.
And as I do purge, I do think about now I do, not before, not during my first ceremony, but now in ceremony, like the last time we were at eye healing retreats, I will consciously think about what I'm trying to release and
Mhm.
I'll purge it with intention.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably usually how it works for most people. I do remember when we were at Aya Healing Retreats, and at one point I was trying to sense what is it that I'm purging, and it was fear. Like I was releasing fear. And
Yeah.
then I did kind of play through like all the different areas of my life where I'm still holding on to some fear.
Yes.
Interesting with the medicine where, it's not like you're so lost that you don't have control over your mind. There's still a part of you that can consciously work with it.
Yes. Yes. What I noticed too is, and just related to that, I purge a lot of anger out, not so much fear, but yeah, that's sort of the emotion that I'm purging as. But I can completely relate to purging out certain emotions,
Mhm.
during the act. And what I noticed is when I'm having trouble purging, sometimes a facilitator, like Elio, he'll come over and he'll blow mapacho smoke
Right.
on my head, and that'll cause me to purge, and I don't know how that works. The mapacho, I guess, is a master plant, and it's helping us get rid of these things. And to me, it's just pure magic.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
remember him standing over me. He saw me struggling. He blew the smoke directly on my head, and at that very moment, it just all came out.
Well, remember, Mapacho is the master plant of all master plants,
Yeah.
and it helps facilitate the work of whatever plant it's taken in with, right? So it's helping grandmother ayahuasca to do her job and helping chacruna to do its job.
Yeah.
And and then also with the idea that one of the gifts of Mapacho is to help clear energies. I mean, that's one of its primary functions, is to help clear energies. So yeah, very effective.
Do you feel like the amount of medicine that you take is directly related to how much you purge, or what's your experience been with that?
I think it does. I think it does to a point. It's almost, I don't know, from what I've gathered from different people's experiences and all, I think there's a point at which you kind of like hit a tolerance or something. But a little bit more is sometimes what some people need to kind of induce things. I know that when I did like took an extra cup um in Peru, that I did vomit like a little bit more than I had when I took, say, one cup.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think it could go both ways. I've had experiences where I felt like I wanted to take a lighter night or have an easier time.
Yeah.
So I'll cut my dose in half. But
Mhm.
then they say that the medicine gives you what you need, not necessarily what you want. So let's say I'll take half my regular dose. I'll
Mhm.
still purge all throughout that ceremony.
Mhm.
And it just blows my mind. And sometimes I'll take a bigger dose and my night will be okay.
Mhm.
I'm not purging as much. So it really varies,
Yeah.
I think. And the medicine, I think there's an intelligence behind it. Mother Aya knows exactly what you need during that time in ceremony, and that's what she gives you.
I think it's also like each person getting the dose that they need to basically open the door.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of
Yeah.
like cancer genes. Like
Hmm.
there's a lot of research behind dairy products and cancer, and it's like it doesn't take that much of dairy products to kind of flip the switch. So if you think of a light switch, it's either on or off. It's not
Hmm.
like halfway. I mean, if you have a dimmer, okay, but setting that
Yeah.
aside, the switch is either on or off, the door is either open or closed. And it seems like, and maybe this is different for the same person on different nights, but it's like you need the dose to open the door, to turn on the switch. And once it's open, it's open, you
That's
know?
interesting. I've never heard that before. Yeah, even with cancer, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, vomiting is just one form of purging. Do you vomit or purge that way each ceremony, or are there other ways that purging happens for you?
I usually purge at least once, and usually just once, but I have purged more than once on certain ceremonies, and probably when I've drunk a little bit more. But and it's a significant form of purging for me, but I would say that I have other forms of purging that feel more significant in a way.
Hmm.
And um
Like
one of
what?
them, pardon me,
Like what?
like yawning.
Yawning. Okay.
Yeah, so that's usually my first sign that the medicine is starting to work. It started my first ceremony and has happened every ceremony since. I just start yawning, and my yawns are just they're not like the yawns I have outside a ceremony. Like they're huge. My jaw is stretched, they're long. But the most significant thing is that I'll yawn all night long. And it's not like they're nonstop and that all I'm doing is yawning, but like I'll yawn and then a little time will pass. And then sometimes it could just be a few minutes or, maybe 10 minutes or whatnot, but I'll be throughout the entire ceremony. I will yawn and I will yawn maybe 60 times in a ceremony.
Do you feel sleepy though?
But I don't feel sleepy. Nope. In fact, usually I'm sitting upright on the edge of my mat. Um, so I think it's two things for me. One is that because I, I'm I'm turning 60 next week, I've had a lot of years under my belt. So um it's sort of like this exhaustion of life in general, but there was a particular 5 to 7 year period not long ago within this last decade where that was incredibly challenging, like nothing I would have ever imagined. And it was exhausting.
Hmm.
And I feel seen by Mother. I feel like she knows how exhausting that was and that that exhaustion is probably still with me in a way. And so is giving me the opportunity to release the exhaustion.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think the other thing about it is that because I've received the message to sing ever since my first ceremony and many others, I think it's stretching my jaw, you know,
Yeah.
opening up the vocal cords and then also like Don Miguel. I noticed most of the shamans I've noticed they will start yawning before they start singing their Icaros.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. I did notice Don Miguel do a lot of yawning. And it
Yep.
wasn't until that I realized that yawning was a form of purging. I just thought, man, this shaman is bored. He doesn't want to keep singing to us, but it's actually a form of purging.
It's a form of purging, and it might be also warming up his vocal cords and mouth for all the singing that he's about to do. I have noticed that my timing on the yawning seems to sync a bit,
Hmm.
with the shaman who's leading ceremony, which is interesting. But
What does that look like? Like he yawns and then you yawn?
well, just that after drinking the medicine, the amount of time before we both start yawning seems to be similar.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I know that when he would come and sit in front of me, he did a lot of yawning, but I think that's because he knew that that was something that I do and that I need for
Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting. I've never had an attack of the yawns during ceremony.
I don't usually hear most people yawning quite as much as me, but the other thing with this yawning and the singing is sometimes I would notice Don Miguel making a sound at the end of his yawns. And other shamans I've worked with where they're like, and they make it more of a vocal.
Yeah.
That's a practice that I started when we were there together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Intentionally started to use that yawn as an opportunity to practice vocalizing.
Interesting. That's great.
Mhm.
So it serves a dual purpose. It's a purge and it preps you to sing if that's what you're going to do in some point in ceremony. So, you know how I love to purge? I love crying. Do you ever cry during ceremony? Like in my everyday life, I have trouble crying.
Mhm.
Maybe just conditioning as a man. My dad always said, "Don't cry. It's a sign of weakness." But in ceremony, if I can take that opportunity to cry, it's just such a beautiful release,
Mhm.
and relief for
Mhm.
me.
It does seem like the medicine helps. Like if I'm not getting all the rest I need, so in ceremony, I'm given this opportunity to yawn a lot and release exhaustion. And then if you're not crying in your everyday life, and then the medicine gives you the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, yeah. I remember one ceremony, I started crying from the beginning of ceremony up until the end. And that was one ceremony where I didn't purge. I didn't puke. I mean,
Mhm.
or I didn't vomit. And it was just crying the entire time. And I was like curl up in a ball, going like, "Ah, ah." the just the entire time. And then I remember the facilitator just coming over and comforting me and just putting a gentle hand on my back, and
Yeah,
it was really comforting. But afterwards, I just felt so light.
so healing.
Yeah, so healing. Like I released years and years of just
You know,
dark
our
energies.
emotion is rep water holds our emotion. You know, we're like 80% water, just like the planet has 80% water, right?
Hmm.
We're microcosms of the planet. And and in dreams too, water represents emotion. So if like you're having a dream of a tidal wave or rain downpouring, it's a lot of emotion. And it's one of the reasons we need to drink a lot of water the next day and all is to continue to flush out all the emotions. Or after a massage, when a lot of energy is being worked out, it's really important to drink a lot of water.
Hmm.
Tears is one of the ways that the body releases water. You know, the tears are holding the emotion. So it's interesting, you know, like this idea of you crying all night long. Yeah, the water is coming and it's releasing in that way through the tears.
Well, that's interesting that you bring up water because the other day I was at a restaurant and I got a fortune cookie, and the fortune cookie said, "Soon you will be back on the water."
Mm.
And I thought, what does this mean? I don't have a boat. I'm not planning to go on a boat. But maybe it's referring to being back in my own emotions. And I
Well,
and I
we're having this conversation right now about it.
yeah, exactly. Maybe it has to do with conversation. And I did have a massage yesterday, synchronistically. I thought about, oh, I just had the massage, my body feels good. I should probably drink a lot more water to
Mhm.
try to, flush out the toxins or whatever the thing is behind that.
And
So,
when you think about purging too, like the vomiting, you know, again, is off in ceremony, if there's residual food in someone's system, they can vomit up, you know, food pieces and that kind of thing. And then over time, it generally becomes more clear. But, you know, when we do vomitivos, like the dragon's blood,
yeah.
right? Usually, and again, you usually do it in the morning before you've eaten.
Hold on,
But
before we go on, for our viewers that don't know what that is, maybe you can explain what that is.
well, dragon's blood is an excretion from uh, a tree in the jungle, and it's pretty cool because you can take a knife to the trunk of the tree,
It's a
and it'll
sap, right?
yeah, like a sap, right, and it'll start to ooze out, and it looks like blood. I mean, it's that dark red color, and it just oozes out, and it looks very much like blood. So, um, this one's a concentrate, and then you add water to it and drink it down, wait for a little while, and then pretty soon you start purging. And what I was going to say is that that purge, it may be different colors, and over as you purge it'll become more and more clear, but it's not really like food vomiting. It's just water. And again, this idea of water bringing up emotion and cleansing the system.
Yeah.
You know, and you have to drink a lot of water in the purge, as you know, we would drink many quarts of water, almost to an uncomfortable point.
Yeah.
But it's yeah, the water is moving the emotion,
Yeah, that's
cleansing.
interesting in that I remember them saying sometimes in ceremony, if you feel like you can't purge, you just have to drink a little bit of water from your water bottle and it will trigger that purge. Or as another option, you can drink more medicine. You can ask for a second cup, from the maestro, and then that'll trigger
True.
more
No, that's a
vomiting
good
and
point,
purging.
right? Like, yeah, no, but I mean, it would make sense to try drinking water first, perhaps. And
Yeah.
yeah, right.
I do remember though that one of our friends from ceremony saying that even though you feel dehydrated, that the body somehow finds the water or the liquid to help you purge.
Mhm.
And I remember during one ceremony, I was purging all throughout ceremony. And I was thinking to myself, I must be so dehydrated. I'm not going to drink any more water because I want to stop purging. But somehow my body found the water, and it felt like the water was coming from so deep inside my stomach, like at the very pit of my stomach, and it was bringing it up in torrents. And it kept going on and on until everybody had left the Maloka, and I was just by myself in the Maloka, and my body, I wasn't drinking any more water. It just was finding it somehow, and it just kept coming out in a deluge, and it just was blowing my mind. And the human body is so amazing that way.
No, actually, that's very interesting to me because this is a little bit of a side topic, but in regard to female ejaculation, which first of all, not everyone knows that women can ejaculate, but we can. We have prostates just like men and
Hmm.
are capable of ejaculating. It's another one of those things I think that's where women have been tampered down in society and that hasn't been supported. But and I've taught classes around this topic. I have found it fascinating along the lines of what you're saying, is that in my experience, like there will be times where it'll just be happening all night long, and I'm like, where is all this water coming from? Because I'm not drinking equal
Yeah.
to out.
Yeah.
I did have a dream, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, where I was this statue and pregnant with a necklace of a cross, but there was this statue on the top of a waterfall, and my arms were going like this, like the infinity symbol. And my hands were touching the top of the waterfall and splashing, splashing, splashing. And then the waterfall went down into the ocean. And it was this idea that there's just this endless access to water, a reservoir. Not to say that we shouldn't drink water, but there's something that happens in particular states where it seems like we're pulling in water from I don't know where, you know?
Yeah, maybe it comes from another dimension, from a different place. It's
Yeah.
it's really interesting. I was thinking about that too. I was like, where is this water coming from?
Mhm.
Maybe there's a little portal in my stomach where it's sucking water from the spirit world, and it's expelling it through my mouth so I can purge these emotions, and I can purge these traumas. But it's an
Another
interesting
water
question.
related form of purging would be sweating.
Sweating. Yes. Do you sweat
I don't
during ceremony?
that much, no.
I'll sweat during
Yeah.
ceremony. Sometimes it's kind of a weird sweat where my body feels hot, and then I'll sweat, and then it'll feel cold. So it'll be like a combination of hot and cold at the same time, and then I'll have to like get my blanket and just cover myself up, to feel safe again.
So now
So
you know what it feels like for a woman to go through menopause.
is that what that is? Okay. Yeah,
We
I
call them
didn't know
hot
that.
flashes, where you're like lying in bed and then you're like, you just start sweating and you have to strip off all your clothes and the blankets. And the next thing you know, you're cold and you're covering up. And kind of like when people, you know, are detoxing, uh,
Okay.
which is
Yeah.
often referred to as the flu or something like that. I think of it more as detoxing.
Hmm.
But yeah, we get the, hot and cold and
Yeah, that's good that you said the flu. I do relate it to the flu. I've had the flu a couple times and had those symptoms, just sort of cold chills and sweats.
well, the flu is really a detox process. I
Oh,
mean,
that makes sense.
that's
Yeah,
another.
so maybe the ayahuasca is causing flu-like symptoms to help us detox whatever we need to detox, and that includes sweating.
Yeah.
Related to sweating, I've had the shakes. Have you ever had shaking during ceremony?
Mine is different. You talk about shaking first.
Yeah, so during ceremony, sometimes I'll just have tremors through my body and it'll be uncontrollable. I'll just twitch and different parts of my body will shake. My arms, my hands, my legs. And it at first, when I first experienced it, it was a little bit disturbing, because a loss of control of your body is never fun,
Mhm.
right? But at some point I realized, oh, this is a type of purging, and afterwards, the day before, I just always felt better. My body felt a little bit more stable. And I'm wondering if it's the nerves just releasing tension. I actually don't really know what it is, but it's just something I've experienced.
Mhm. I think a lot of people do shake. And so when you said that, I was thinking, no, I don't typically do that, but I have had experiences where like my mouth will be twitching, like you said, twitching, like
Yeah.
constantly. Like it's like, what's that about? Or I have had that at leg, like twitching more, I guess I would call it, than shaking, because there's both.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. And yeah, it feels like the medicine working on certain nervous systems, maybe tight muscles where tension's being held, and trying to wake it up or trying to release stuff from it. Um, so similar to shaking, but different for me is that I'll sway. And this is something that
Hmm.
started two trips to Peru ago. So maybe 15 ceremonies ago. All of a sudden this new thing started happening to me where I would sway. And it's another one of those things like the yawning, like, oh, the medicine's starting to kick in. Well, now for me, I'll start swaying, and it's usually before the shaman starts singing. It's almost like I can feel the music coming.
Hmm.
And again, that's where my timing with the shaman seems very similar, with the yawning and then the swaying, and then next thing I know, the music's coming. But similar to the yawning, once I start swaying, I don't stop all night long. I mean, unless I have to go to the
Hmm.
bathroom or something, but I just sway all night long. And I love it. And then sometimes it'll be a forward motion or like a front and back. So it changes form a little bit, but I'm in all night long, constantly swaying. So I feel like that is also a form of purging, I believe.
Well, do you think that has to do with being filled with spirit or going into that trance state? Because I mentioned to you before we started this podcast that I had gone to a spirit circle the other day and we were channeling for various people. And when I started channeling for the person that was assigned to me, I started swaying
Mhm.
involuntarily. And I was like, "Oh, I've never done this before. Why am I swaying?" But it seemed to keep me in that spirit flow, and I felt the energy coming through me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does feel like that. Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's very positive. It's a very maybe it's not purging in the sense of getting rid of unwanted energies, but it feels, I don't know, it kind of feels like a purging just because it's a way of releasing energy,
Mhm.
it's happening through movement.
Yeah.
I do notice sometimes outside of ceremony and everyday life, there are times where I'll find myself swaying. It's not as much, but I notice that it's there. And I find it very grounding and very calming, like just being rocked in the arms of the grandmother or something. I don't
That
know.
makes sense.
Yeah.
And you're also moving the energy, right? By moving your body, you're moving the energies in your body around and you're helping process it in that way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what else we got? Oh, we got the ISTA.
Hmm. Yeah, so ISTA again is the International School of Temple Arts, and I only recently found out about this group, these teachings, uh, uh, when we were at Aya Healing Retreats. It was mentioned to me, and I did my research, and it felt like it was a good fit. So I went on a retreat, and one of the things I learned was, which I consider to be another way to help ourselves purge outside of ceremony. Actually, it probably would work well in ceremony if you thought to do it. But very good outside of ceremony in everyday life. And that's that if you feel anger coming up, or fear, or confusion, or frustration, unwanted, unhealthy, unwanted feelings. I mean, there is a healthy aspect to having those feelings, of course, but you
Mhm.
don't want to hold on to them, right? So one of the ways to release it, to purge them out, was the hand scream, where you're like, and you could do that almost anywhere, and it really does muffle the sound. Or lying on a bed or a soft mattress, fold out on the floor, and doing the tantrum like a little kid, where you're pounding and kicking your feet and just releasing energy that way. Or the jumping up and down with your hands in the air, and that might even feel silly and maybe a joyful purging, but the idea is to release the emotions as closely as possible to when you're feeling them.
That makes sense. So you don't store them.
So they don't store them, so that they don't fester and grow
Yeah.
and start to take over in ways that aren't healthy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I can relate to that in my everyday life where I've started, let's say, I'm feeling heavy anger. Let's say I was stuck in traffic or I had a bad day at work. I'll try to release that energy or purge that energy right away. I'll scream into a pillow, or I will listen to some angry music and do some angry dancing. Then I'll listen to some sad music and I'll try to cry
Mhm.
actually. And I'll just have that release. So yeah, I can relate to that.
Mhm. You're reminding me, you asked if I cried in ceremony, and most of my experiences have just been very positive. Not that I haven't had places of fear, but I have cried tears of joy. I mean, there have been times where the tears just start flowing down. I'm
Yes.
overwhelmed that grandmother wants me to sing. Like, I just feel so honored and so humbled and so seen, and whatever it is, and that, or feeling the connection of everything, and just having these tears of joy just coming down.
I
Yeah.
love that. Those tears of bliss, that's one of the best types of crying during ceremony. Sometimes I hear you. I'll feel so much gratitude and so much love that the tears will just start flowing. And it's a release, but it's also very nurturing. It's a different type of crying.
It is. It feels like a beautiful acknowledgement too,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
to show that release. I feel like we have to mention too, diarrhea
That's
and
right. Yeah.
indigestion is a big form of purging in ceremony as well.
It is. That one is an interesting one because even though you're feeling weak, it forces you to get up or get help from one of the facilitators to guide you to the restroom. And I myself have spent a good amount of time during ceremony just being in that restroom and trying to release it in that way,
Right.
you
And then
know?
also, I don't know if you've had this experience, but they call it, I think it's called the Egyptian, where you're sitting on the toilet, you've got your back into action, and that thrust of things going out there. Also, there's the vomiting at the same time. So it's,
Yes, yeah.
like
Is that what they call it? Okay.
yeah,
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 that
coming
totally
out
makes
both
sense.
ends.
I've heard somebody else call it like double platinum for some reason, but that the Egyptian
Yeah,
makes more sense. And I've
it's like
had that.
different. Yeah.
And what's interesting about those moments is sometimes I'll be in that state of pain, but at the same time I'll be in a state of bliss. So it's all these emotions happening at the same time. And I didn't know I could be in a state of bliss while doing the Egyptian,
Mhm.
So really interesting.
And the cleansing after, it's like, okay, I am cleansed out. And I remember I did have a rough night with a lot of action on both directions, and but the next day I wanted to fast because I'm like, oh my God, I don't think my body has ever felt so emptied and purified. And I just didn't want to throw anything into my body. So I chose to fast afterwards for the whole
Yeah.
day, just to feel that purity for, at least another 24 hours.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I've had some rough nights where I didn't eat the next day. Well, mostly because I still had the nausea, and I probably wouldn't be able to keep anything down. So maybe I just sip water. But keeping your body pure and clean the next day, that makes sense. So, all
Mhm.
right. Do you have any other thoughts on this topic, or you think we covered it all?
Think if there was any other, I'm sure there are other forms of purging, like some people maybe they cough. Oh, actually, I'll clear my throat a fair amount. I noticed that.
That's a good one.
Clearing.
Yeah, clearing throat, or sometimes I'll have phlegm or
Yeah.
mucus come up, and then I'll have to blow my nose a lot.
Mhm.
There's some ceremonies where I'll use my entire roll of toilet paper,
Mhm.
just blowing my nose, and I definitely think that's another form of purging.
Yeah. So, it's different for everyone. There are some common things like vomiting but there's many forms of purging, and it's different for different people, and it's different for the same person in different ceremonies. And it's, just really cool to look at the symbology of the type of
Yes.
purging, to understand more about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really whatever you need. The medicine definitely gives you what you need.
Cheers to purging.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. I think that brings us to the end of this podcast. Lisa, where can people find you?
You can find me on my website, Sacred Exploration well, no, that would be my email, sacredexploration.com. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I have also imperfectlyvegan.com, and you can sign up for my newsletter there. Yeah.
Great. People can find me and the various energetic services that our organization offers at rishasanctuary.com. That is RISHA sanctuary.com. And we also have an Instagram account, and that is just risha_sanctuary.com. So if you guys have any comments, please leave them below. We'd like to continue on the conversation with you guys, comments or any questions, or if you guys just want to connect.
Love
And
it.
that's and oh, and if you did like this video, please consider giving it a like, hitting that subscribe button. We really appreciate the support that you are giving our podcast and this channel.
Thank you, Rye.
Yeah,
Always
thank you,
good to meet
Lisa.
you.
Yeah, we'll see you guys later.